Hi, I'm Brickroad, and I recently got my distressingly sharp and very well manicured claws on the Atari 50 collection. I got mine on PS5, but it's out on every other system that matters, and this is a great collection. I highly recommend playing it if you have an interest in the history of video games or in video game preservation or anything. But in particular, I was interested in this game, Swordquest. Swordquest AirWorld is the first of a proposed series of 4 games that Atari had put out in the very early 80s. AirWorld is the only one that we had in our house. My father owned an Atari 2600, and in his collection was AirWorld. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the history of Swordquest because there are excellent videos already on YouTube describing that in great detail, but I'm going to describe a little bit that's pertinent to what this Let's Play series is going to be. Now, in 1980s, the very early 1980s, I was between -1 and 1 year old when this game came out. It's important to remember that people didn't really know what video games were going to look like. You know, like, there weren't actually established genres, really, yet. There was a lot of lessons that people hadn't learned. And what Atari endeavored to do with the Swordquest series was, what if we made a video game, but the video game was also a sweepstakes? You can see on the cartridge box here, play to win the $150,000 Swordquest challenge, right? Now, this is the digital museum portion of the Atari 50, detailing some of the Swordquest's materials. And we can go down through some of this excellent artwork here and whatnot. There was a comic book that was associated with it that we'll go into a little bit. But this is the pertinent stuff here. These are the prizes that you were supposed to be able to win. If you're able to solve AirWorld, you could potentially win what you see here is the Talisman. And then when they released Fireworld, they were going to give away a chalice. Waterworld, the prize was going to be a crown. And then the final game, AirWorld, the prize was going to be the Philosopher's Stone. And each of these was worth like $25,000. And then the 4 winners of those 4 games would go on to compete somehow to win the ultimate sword of sorcery, which I think looks a little tacky, honestly. Like, it's very shiny, and it's no doubt very valuable, but I think all of these prizes kind of suck aesthetically. They didn't ask me. I was -1 years old. So, what actually happened, though, is that the video game console industry crashed in 1983. The video game crash of 83 has been documented very well by many different sources. So again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in the beginning of this Let's Play series, but Atari was not able to complete the Swordquest series. Fireworld came out, and the chalice was given away, but then Waterworld was only sold to people on Atari's mailing list. There was no crown given away, and then AirWorld just never got released. And as far as I know, the company who designed and made these prizes for Atari, the crown and the stone and the sword were either not made or were melted back down for their components, or are squirreled away in a secret Atari bunker somewhere, depending on what source you're listening to. So let's talk a little bit about what Swordquest actually is. Like, how does the game actually play? Well, let's get into it. This is AirWorld. This is the one that we had in my household when I was a kid, and a lot of sources that document Swordquest, especially on YouTube, I've noticed, in like big like stack of Atari game retrospective kind of thing, but it's often and mistakenly referred to as like an early version of an RPG. There's nothing even remotely like an RPG in AirWorld. Let me describe the gameplay. You see, we start as our little man here in this red room. At the bottom of the screen is my inventory. You can see I'm carrying a dagger, a grappling hook, and a coil of rope. When you're standing inside of a room, you can push the button to go into like the inner sanctum of that room. And inside the inner sanctum is the door to go back out. This is a symbol indicating what room we're in. The 12 rooms of AirWorld were patterned after the classical zodiac. So this first room is Virgo the Virgin, so that is an Atari Virgin. chilling out in the red room. And Virgo the Virgin has this necklace in her room. I can either push the button to take items out of the inner sanctum, or I can push a button to leave an item behind. And then I can leave and go to the next room. And that's the entire game. That's really it. There are some action sequences that you could play through. Let's go up into this room here. Yeah, this is an action sequence for Leo, where you've got to just kind of walk through this little waterfall thing. And if you touch it, it sends you back to the beginning. But each of these rooms, this would be Cancer the Crab. Each of these rooms contains some number of items, or you could leave some number of items in there. And the reason you would do this is eventually these codes would pop up. This is a free code that they give you, a free clue to solving the puzzle of Earthworld. They give you this one for free, and let's talk about what this clue means. The numbers 16 and 4. So if we go back out into not the instruction manual, which, again, this Atari collection is incredible. It has instruction manuals for all of the old games. Really, really good stuff. But if we were to go back out into this comic book, we can go to page 16, which is here. Panel 1, 2, 3, 4. So this vertical panel here with the excellent butt shot of our heroine, Tara. If you examine this panel very closely, you can read the word Spire. I can't zoom in. Oh, I can zoom in a little bit more than that. You can see the word Spire printed inside of the comic panel. So the clue from the game was supposed to point you into the comic, and it was supposed to do that enough times to give you a list of words which you could then use to solve the final riddle of Earthworld. And then you would mail that into Atari, and Atari would do so. I don't know what their selection process was, but they would whittle down their list of submissions that they got down to one person who was given the talisman. And this is where we run into the problem of Swordquest. Because as a kid, I didn't know how to play the game. We didn't have the comic anymore, didn't have the instruction manual. This was all we had, and my father didn't know how to solve it either, and that was pretty common. A lot of people bought Earthworld as a full-price game for their Atari 2600. Some of them maybe not even realizing there was a sweepstakes involved, but the game is designed to be won by only one person. And the way that Atari facilitated that is to functionally turn it into a lottery. To get any more clues other than that first one, let me see if I can get the demonstrate how to get the first item clue, because this one's a freebie. When we run up into, I think it's Aries. Yeah, this is Aries. We get a free clue, 16-4. If we run, the rooms will just loop eventually. Is this Gemini here? No, that's Pisces. Gemini is a bluish room, I believe. If we can find it here. That's orange. I think we just went through the whole loop. That's probably Virgo the Virgin, Leo the Lion. Yeah, Cancer the Crab. This should be Gemini here. Yeah, this is Gemini. And I believe... So you can see Gemini has a candle in their room, and they also have a lance. And I believe if we leave the dagger behind after seeing the first clue, if we attempt to leave, there's the second clue of the game. To unlock this clue, you have to see the first clue, and then you have to leave the dagger in Gemini's room, and then exit Gemini's room. This is where I was excited to play these games on the Atari 50, because in my head, I was picturing them as like archaic versions of a puzzle book game, right? Like the better parts of Tunic, or even similar to what I liked about like the Myst series or Myst likes as a genre. But no, as far as I can tell, there is no clue whatsoever telling you leave the dagger in Gemini's room. You just have to do it through trial and error. And that one's the easy one to figure out. There's like 16 or something items in the game. If you try leaving all of them in all of the rooms, you will eventually get this Gemini clue. But then there's many, many more clues to find, and each one becomes progressively more and more difficult. You have to have X amount of arbitrary items dropped into each individual room, and I think the final clue requires all 16 items to be perfectly placed. And as far as I can tell, as far as anyone knows, there's no way to determine that except through painstaking trial and error, or by, I guess, reverse engineering the game's code. So that's a real shame that EarthWorld is actually not a very solvable game. Like, I'm not going to be able to sit down and just take notes and solve it. And I believe one of the winners for Fireworld actually specified that rather than just getting clues out of the game, he just scoured the comic book, which is what you would do, right? It would take less time to just look through every single panel of the comic book than it would to try to get all these clues through trial and error. So Swordquest EarthWorld is kind of a bust, which is too bad. They did release... Let's see here. Going down the timeline. Yeah, here's Fireworld. Basically the same game, leaving items behind and things to try to unlock clues. Again, only through trial and error. And while I think the artwork is excellent in that like 1980s like Dungeons and Dragons kind of way, which I'm a sucker for that kind of artwork, but as far as I can tell, the game is also unsolvable, and it's also really bad. Like, the action sequences in EarthWorld are at least a little fun. The action sequences in Fireworld are just a buggy mess. So then we had Waterworld, which sort of didn't come out. You had to be on Atari's mailing list or something to get a hold of it. I do believe this one is solvable if you play through it. I've put about an hour or two into it, just kind of playing around. I think I figured a few things out. But what ended up happening is if we go to the game library here and we scroll all the way to the front of the list, part of what's on this collection are a few modern reimaginings of classic Atari games. A 3D version of Haunted House, a more colorful, more easy to play version of Breakout, and the Mad Lads actually completed Swordquest AirWorld. Now, this game, there had been rumors and legends that undiscovered prototypes had been found over the years. As far as I know, all of those rumors are completely unsubstantiated. As far as I'm aware, this game was made, at best, based on some design notes that somebody found in a closet in Atari somewhere, and at worst, was created out of whole cloth. The benefit of this game, though, having come out in 2022, is that it's a modern game in terms of its design philosophy. It's not a sweepstakes. It's not designed so only one person can win it. It's designed to be an enjoyable puzzle challenge to complete. And with that, my preamble for the introduction into Swordquest AirWorld is complete, and we can go into the game here. So we start out on our Pegasus. I think our Pegasus name is Tianma, I'm pretty sure. In our inventories down at the bottom of the screen, you see we have a pocket full of coins and we have a longsword. And all of the Atari 2600 games are just one button. So on the action screens, you're like, one button here just makes me fly a little bit. Unfortunately, they did not commission a comic book for AirWorld, which is too bad. But we do get this beautiful manual with all of the information in it. And it starts us off with this poem, which is going to help us solve the riddle of AirWorld. This artwork, I do believe, dates back to the 80s. I think they remastered it for this collection. Again, excellent collection. Cannot recommend it highly enough. How far your quest has taken you, entire decades past. Above remains a skybound trial, divined to be the last. Enlightenment as yet eludes as heroes face air's wrath. 16 of 8 by 8 concludes the final Swordquest path. And thus starts the puzzle. Now, each of the 4 Swordquest games were based on some form of ancient mythology. The classical Zodiac, I think one is based on the holy tree from the Judaic Talmud. I'm not really sure because I didn't complete Fireworld. But AirWorld is based on the I Ching, which I thought was Japanese, but is actually apparently Chinese. It shows what I know about Asian mythology. But my understanding is that this is a sort of fortune-telling device where you would throw the sticks on the table or on the mat or whatever, and then the position of the sticks would help determine your fortune. Obviously, this is all mumbo-jumbo. Please do not make any life decisions based on the arbitrary shapes that are formed by throwing chicken bones or tarot cards or crystal balls or any of that. But as the foundation for a mythological video game, I think it's fine. This is a map of AirWorld here. It's the biggest game of Swordquest by far. The first game, Earthworld, that I showed you a little bit, only has 12 rooms for the classical Zodiac. This game has 64 rooms, one for each possible interpretation of the I Ching. So each room, and this is the correct layout once we get into the maze, you'll see. Each room has a few bits of information in it. So that's kind of the first phase of solving the puzzle, was encoding that information into a map that I could use. Because the in-game map, as you saw, was basically just the symbols on the floor and then the numbers of the symbols. And you can correlate those with the readings in the I Ching afterwards. So as we come in, you can see there is a helpful little on-screen map in the bottom left there. Very, very nice. And so we've come in on the bottom row, the fourth room from the left, which if we go into the instruction manual, we can see is room number 41. You can see there is the shape we saw on the floor. So if we flip the book over and read interpretation 41 here, we see that we enter into the maze in the room decrease. The interpretation is your emotions, status, or even possessions may go down, but take this chance to prepare for future upswings. Now, the manual says that there is some trial and error involved in solving this game, and I think they're just kind of hedging their bets. They're kind of couching the language a little bit, because there is trial and error involved in the previous 3 Swordquest games. In fact, I would argue that Earthworld and Fireworld are only solvable through trial and error. But I don't think trial and error is necessary in this game. You're going to intuit things, you're going to test your understanding of things, but you're never going to do just something random to see what happens if you understand how the game works. So the first phase of the game is to map it out. That's what I'm going to do now, is take you on a tour of AirWorld. And we're going to start over here in the bottom left corner. And I wanted to encode all this information because you could start solving the puzzle and looking at the riddles right now, but without putting a map together first and knowing which bits of information are contained in each room, you don't really have enough context to do anything. And I guess this is where I'm going to put down my spoiler warning. This is going to be a walkthrough of the game while I talk about my feelings of it, but you're also going to see the solution on screen. I'm going to describe how much I enjoyed solving the game as I went. I think the game took me 5 or 6 hours the first time I did it. And the first hour or two was just making this map and this tour. So we're down in the bottom corner now. And this room is called Treading. We can go into the instruction manual here. What I would do is went to the corner. I went and looked up the shape. I saw the number. And then you go to the book. And you see number 10 is Treading. Walk with care, but be sure of foot. Be aware of stronger forces, but do not compromise your principles. Now, when you're standing in a room, if you push the action button, you go into the inner sanctum of the room. There's not a symbol here like there was in Earthworld, because the symbol is on the outside here. But you can see there's an item in the room. This is a tome, the Tome of Knowledge. In the instruction manual, if you can't tell what the graphics are just by looking at them, and some of them are a little questionable, but there is this handy-dandy cheat sheet with all of the items in the game. This is by far more items than existed in any of the previous Swordquest games. And in fact, the Potion of Divination, I don't even know that exists in the game anymore. I was never able to find one. So maybe there are, as yet, unplumbed secrets in AirWorld that I was not smart enough to unlock. Let's get on with our tour. I don't actually need that Tome of Knowledge, so we're going to leave that sitting there. So this next room here is room number 54. This is the Marrying Maiden. If we go into the instruction manual here and read 54, share your affections, but with care and caution. A bride keeps her face covered until the commitment ceremony. Now, this room is a little special because this is actually a clue. Reading that interpretation of this casting of the I Ching is supposed to tell you something about what item to put in this room to unlock a clue. So some number of rooms have actually useful information hidden in their I Ching interpretations, and then that information is supposed to inform what items you bring to the room to unlock clues. So then the question, once I was reading my way through these interpretations, and I was like, well, obviously there's not going to be, all of these are not going to be useful. This is way, way too much data to work through. How many of these rooms do I need to be looking for that are going to have reasonable clues? And that's where we go back to the opening poem. 16 of 8x8 concludes the final sword quest path. Well, 8x8 must refer to the 64 rooms of the AirWorld castle? Palace? I don't actually know where we are. 64 rooms in an 8x8 grid. So 16 of these rooms are going to give me clues. I need 16 clues to complete the first phase of the game. Before moving on to phase 1, though, we'll just have to finish up phase 0. If we go into Marrying Maiden, we see there's just some rubble on the floor. There are a couple of these junk items. This is just rubble, I guess. We're not going to take it with us. And in fact, we don't actually need this sword either. But this is the only RNG element in AirWorld. Is there are a couple different rubble, like garbage items strewn about. Coins count as a garbage item, but they are used in one of the solutions. And what rubbish items are in what room is randomized. But other than that, other items are always in the same place. Shoutouts to S31Jonas for sponsoring this video. If you liked the video and you want to see more, please tickle my thumb, leave a friendly comment, and ring my little bell.